My stepmother tried to kick me out of my own house, so I made her my maid instead, and then the rain hit the windows in steady, rhythmic taps as I sat at the dining table, my dinner untouched. Across from me, Vivien smirked, swirling the wine in her glass like she had already won some invisible battle. Tyler scrolled through his phone without a care, and Sophia painted her nails a bright, obnoxious red. My father, Arthur, sat at the head of the table, as usual, silent, pretending he didn't notice the way his wife always played puppet master. Then, with the casual cruelty she had perfected over the years, Vivien spoke. Well, John, since you're a working adult now, it's only fair you start contributing to the household. Rent is due on the 1st of every month, just like anyone else. I stared at her, the words slow to register. Rent? In the house I had lived in my entire life? The house I cleaned while Tyler played video games for hours? The house where I cooked while Sophia spent her time shopping? The house where I was treated like an extra rather than a son? The unfairness of it all settled over me like a thick fog. So let me get this straight. My voice was calm, measured. Tyler, who hasn't worked a single day since he graduated 2 years ago, and Sophia, who drains your credit cards like it's a competitive sport, don't have to pay rent. But I do. Vivien didn't even blink. She dabbed at her mouth with a linen napkin, pretending to be thoughtful. I decided my kids need some time to get settled. You, on the other hand, should learn some independence. Something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not in anger. It was a quiet, deliberate break, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smirk forming. That's interesting, I said, my tone light, almost amused. Because this house actually belongs to me. For a moment, there was silence, so thick it swallowed the sound of the rain. Then, laughter erupted. Tyler let out an obnoxious cackle, slapping the table like I had just told the funniest joke in the world. Sophia giggled in that high-pitched, fake way she did when she wanted attention. Even Vivien chuckled, but I could hear the nervous edge beneath it. "What are you talking about?" she asked, still laughing, but her eyes had narrowed. I pulled a folder from the seat next to me, placing it on the table. I flipped it open, revealing the house deed. My name, clear as day, printed at the top. "My grandfather left this house to me before he passed," I said, locking eyes with her. "It's been in my name since I was 18. The laughter died, the silence now suffocating. Tyler's smug expression vanished, Sophia's mouth fell open slightly, and Vivien. She was unreadable, her knuckles white against the stem of her glass. "That's ridiculous," she finally said, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling your father." She dialed and put the call on speaker, her nails tapping furiously against the table as the phone rang. "Hello?" My father's tired voice crackled through the speaker. Vivien's voice was tight, controlled. "Arthur, John is telling some strange story about the house. He says it's his. That can't be true, right?" A silence stretched between them, heavier than the storm outside. Then, my father sighed. "Well," he cleared his throat. "Actually, my father-in-law put the house in John's name before he passed away." Vivien's entire body went stiff. "You didn't think this was something I should know?" she nearly screeched. Arthur's response was weak. It never seemed relevant. Vivien's face burned with rage. "Not relevant? Not relevant that our son owns the house we live in?" She hung up abruptly, tossing the phone onto the table with enough force to make the silverware tremble. The air was thick, suffocating. Tyler and Sophia stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time. Vivien's chest rose and fell as she tried to control her breathing. Then, suddenly, she plastered on a bright, artificial smile. "Well, this has all been a huge misunderstanding," she said lightly, though her voice wavered. "Of course, you don't need to pay rent, John. Let's just forget this conversation happened." I didn't say a word. I stood, my appetite completely gone, and walked toward the stairs. As I climbed, I heard frantic whispers below. Vivien's sharp, hushed tone, Tyler's confused muttering, Sophia's whiny protests. It didn't matter. They had spent years treating me like an outsider in my own home. Now, the balance had shifted. I barely slept that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm raging outside. My mind replayed everything, my stomach twisting with a mix of satisfaction and unease. I knew Vivien wouldn't let this go. She would scheme, plot, try to manipulate her way back into control. By 6 a.m., I was already awake, lying still, waiting for the inevitable. By 7 o'clock, I heard movement downstairs. I was about to get up when I heard voices, Vivien's, low and sharp, and my father's, weak and uncertain. I stayed at the top of the stairs, listening. "Arthur, something needs to be done," Vivien hissed. "John can't stay here anymore." "Vivien, it's his house," Arthur said, his voice tired. "He doesn't need to know that," she snapped. "We'll push him to leave. He applied to jobs out of state, didn't he? Convince him it's for his own good." Arthur hesitated. "Vivien, do you want this house for us or not?" She cut him off, voice dripping with manipulation. "If he stays, we'll never have control." There was a long pause, then Arthur exhaled heavily. "Maybe you're right." I gripped the stair railing, my nails digging into the wood. They wanted me gone. They were willing to lie, push me out of my own home just to keep their control. I inhaled deeply, steadied my heartbeat, and then walked down the stairs, casual, like I hadn't just heard every word. I poured myself a bowl of cereal and sat at the table. Vivien entered a moment later, still gripping her phone. "Good morning, everyone," she said, forcing a bright tone, as if last night hadn't happened. No one responded. Tyler and Sophia walked in, exchanging uneasy glances. My father sat down, looking anywhere but at me. As I took a bite of cereal, I spoke, my tone calm. "Oh, by the way," I said, swallowing my food, "starting next month, you all owe me rent." The room turned to stone. Vivien went pale. Tyler's mouth hung open. Sophia's spoon dropped into her bowl with a soft plop. Vivien's voice wavered. "You're joking." I met her gaze, steady. "No, I'm not." Her breath hitched. Tyler clenched his jaw. Sophia looked close to tears. For the first time in years, I felt it. Control. The next morning after the rent announcement, everything changed dramatically. It wasn't just the silence at the breakfast table, or the way Vivien kept gripping her coffee mug like she wanted to smash it against the wall. It was the tension, the weight of something shifting, something she couldn't control anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one walking on eggshells. They were. I took my time eating, enjoying the uncomfortable energy radiating from across the table. Tyler sat hunched over his plate, stabbing at his eggs but barely eating. Sophia kept checking her phone, biting her lip. My father, as expected, avoided eye contact with everyone, stirring his coffee with the kind of slow, deliberate motions of a man who wanted to be anywhere but here. Vivien was the first to speak. "John, sweetheart," she said in that fake, syrupy voice she used when she wanted something. "I think we should talk about this rent situation. Don't you think this is all a bit drastic?" I finished my bite of toast before answering. "Not at all. It's only fair, right? Everyone contributes." Her smile twitched. "But we're family." I looked up and met her gaze. "Were we family when you tried to kick me out of my own house last night?" Her eyes flashed with panic before she quickly masked it. "John, you misunderstood. I was only suggesting that maybe an out-of-state job would be good for you. It's about your independence, not about pushing you out." I leaned back in my chair, nodding slowly. "Right. Just like it wasn't about control when you demanded I pay rent, but not your kids." Sophia groaned dramatically, tossing her phone onto the table. "Oh my God, can we not do this right now?" Tyler, who had been quiet up until now, scoffed. "This is stupid. I'm not paying anything." I smirked. "Then I suggest you find somewhere else to live." He set his fork down aggressively. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied. "I'll have the lease agreements drafted today. You'll each have a month to decide if you want to stay or find somewhere else." Vivien pushed her chair back suddenly, standing up. "This is unacceptable. Arthur, say something." My father let out a tired sigh, rubbing his temples. "John, is this really necessary?" I turned to him, keeping my voice calm. "Dad, I'm not charging you rent. Just them. I know you can't say no to Vivien, but I can." Arthur looked at me then, his eyes filled with something between guilt and relief. He had never stood up to her. Not once. And now, for the first time, he didn't have to. I was doing it for him. Vivien let out a frustrated breath. "This house has always been a home for all of us." I gave her a pointed look. "Funny. That's not what you said when you told me I needed to start paying rent last night. She went silent, her nails digging into the table. Tyler stood up, shaking his head. I'm not paying. This is a joke. I shrugged. Then pack your bags. Sophia frowned. I'm still in college. How am I supposed to afford rent? I tilted my head. Maybe you should have thought about that before spending all your money on designer bags and clubbing. Vivien slammed her hands onto the table. You are being completely unreasonable. I smiled. No, Vivien. I'm being fair. Everyone contributes, remember? She opened her mouth to argue, but closed it again. She knew she had lost this battle. For now, as the days passed, the mood in the house turned icy. No more morning greetings. No more fake smiles. Just cold stares and forced politeness. I caught Vivien making whispered phone calls to Arthur when she thought I wasn't around, her voice dripping with manipulation. I heard Tyler and Sophia venting to their friends about how insane I was being. But no one left. Not yet. A week later, I found the first signs of resistance. I was going through the mail when I noticed an envelope had been left open, one addressed to me. Inside was a letter from a job I had applied to in Seattle months ago, before any of this started. A job I had completely forgotten about. The letter was a follow-up, asking if I was still interested in the position, but someone had already scribbled a response. I stared at the letter. The words "I accept" had been scrawled in blue ink, my name forged. The audacity of it made my blood boil. I turned on my heel and walked straight to the living room, where Vivien was sitting on the couch with her laptop. She looked up and smiled innocently. Oh, John, everything okay? I held up the letter. Care to explain this? Her eyes flickered to the paper, then back to me. I don't know what you're talking about. I scoffed. Really? So someone else magically forged my name and sent a response to this job. She pursed her lips, feigning offense. I was just trying to help. You applied for that job, didn't you? I assumed you wanted it. I let out a humorless laugh. You assumed I wanted it? Or you wanted me gone? She folded her arms. John, you need to think about your future. My future, I repeated, stepping closer. You mean your future? Because my future threatens yours. Vivien sighed, closing her laptop. John, this hostility isn't good for anyone. We can fix this. You don't have to do all this rent nonsense. We can go back to how things were. I stared at her, amazed at how easily she dismissed everything. Like she could just reset everything with a few honeyed words. No, we can't, I said, my voice steady. Things are different now, and you'll either learn to live with that or leave. She scoffed. And what if we don't pay? I smirked. Then you'll be out on the street. She stood up, straightening her blouse, masking her frustration with feigned elegance. We'll see about that. Over the next few weeks, payments started coming in, but late. Always late. The excuses were predictable. Unexpected bills, a financial rough patch, just need a little more time. But I wasn't buying it. They thought I'd back down. They thought I'd cave. They thought wrong. By the second month, Tyler started selling his gaming consoles and Sophia canceled her shopping trips. Vivien, however, seemed determined to wait me out. She was playing a game, testing me, waiting for me to fold first. But she didn't realize I had all the cards now. One night, after another late payment excuse, I made a decision. It was time to turn the pressure up. At dinner, I cleared my throat. Vivien, since you can't seem to afford rent, I've come up with a solution. She eyed me warily. What solution? You'll work for it. She frowned. What do you mean? I smiled. You're going to be the maid. The room fell into stunned silence. Tyler's fork clattered against his plate. Sophia's mouth dropped open. Vivien's expression darkened. What did you just say? She asked in a low voice. I leaned back, folding my arms. You heard me. You'll cook, clean, do laundry. You'll earn your place here. Vivien's face burned with humiliation. You're joking. I'm not. She turned to Arthur. Arthur, say something. My father just sighed, rubbing his temples again. He wasn't going to save her. Not this time. Vivien turned back to me, eyes furious. You will regret this. I smiled. I doubt it. The next morning, I came downstairs and found Vivien in the kitchen, standing by the sink. She wasn't wearing her usual silk robe or expensive jewelry. Instead, she had on a simple black dress, a white apron tied around her waist, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She was gripping a sponge so hard her knuckles were white, scrubbing the counter like it had personally offended her. I let the sight sink in before stepping forward. "Good morning, Vivien," I said, reaching for a glass. She didn't answer, just kept scrubbing. I poured myself some orange juice, took a slow sip, and then, as if by accident, let the glass slip from my hand. It hit the floor, shattering into pieces, bright orange liquid spreading across the tiles. Vivien froze. I sighed dramatically. Oops. Clumsy me. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the mess, her jaw tight. Then, slowly, she crouched down, grabbing a cloth and a dustpan. Her hands trembled as she wiped up the juice and picked up the glass shards. I watched, arms crossed, waiting. When she was done, she stood up, eyes cold. "Are you enjoying this?" I took another bite of my toast. "Oh, I don't know. Are you?" Her nostrils flared, but she swallowed her anger. She had no choice. That was just the beginning. At lunch, I made sure to sit at the table and wait. I didn't lift a finger. "Vivien, I'd like some more sauce on my plate," I said, casually flipping through my phone. "And be careful. Don't spill it." She served me in silence, her grip on the spoon so tight I thought she might snap it in half. Later that afternoon, as I sat on the couch watching TV, I glanced toward the windows. "Vivien, the windows look dirty. Clean them." She turned to me, expression tight. "It's already getting dark." I tilted my head. Did I ask what time it was? Or did I ask you to clean the windows? Her face burned with humiliation, but she grabbed a rag and the cleaning supplies. As she climbed onto a stool to reach the higher glass, I caught Tyler and Sophia peeking in from the hallway, watching silently. "You two could help, you know," I said, looking at them. "Or would you prefer to sign new contracts with higher rent?" Without a word, they disappeared into their rooms. Vivien scrubbed in silence. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, something that had never happened before. No late-night arguing. No passive-aggressive comments. Just silence. It wasn't joy that filled me. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was peace. A kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The days went by, and Vivien learned quickly that I wasn't bluffing. Every morning, she woke up earlier than usual to start cleaning. The floors were spotless. The kitchen gleamed. The laundry was always folded neatly. She had no choice but to fall in line. Tyler and Sophia, however, were still struggling to accept the new reality. Sophia had stopped going on shopping sprees and started working part-time at a cafe. Tyler, on the other hand, was stubborn. He thought he could wait me out. Then the first eviction notice came. It wasn't a real eviction, not yet. Just a warning. A printed letter with his name on it. A reminder that if he didn't pay his share soon, he'd be out. I left it on his bed. That night, he stormed into the living room, holding the letter up like it was some kind of joke. "What the hell is this?" I barely looked up from my book. "An eviction notice. You can't kick me out. I'm your brother." I finally looked at him. "You're not my brother. You made that clear a long time ago. You're just a tenant now. A tenant who hasn't paid in months." He threw the letter onto the floor. "This is insane. You're actually serious about this?" I sighed. "Tyler, I don't care what you do. Stay, leave, whatever. But if you stay, you pay. If you don't, you're gone." He clenched his jaw, his fists tightening. "You think you're the big man now, huh? Just because Grandpa left you this house?" I stared at him, unimpressed. "No, Tyler. I think I'm in charge now because I am. Now, get out of my face." He stormed upstairs, slamming his door. Sophia, who had been standing in the doorway watching, shook her head. "You're not seriously going to throw him out, are you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why shouldn't I? He's had months to figure this out." She hesitated. "He just needs time." I scoffed. "He's had time. And I don't owe him anything." "I don't owe any of you anything." She swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. "And Mom?" I smirked. "She made her bed. Now she has to sleep in it." Sophia didn't argue. She just nodded and walked away. A week later, Tyler packed his bags. I watched from the porch as he threw his duffel bag into the back seat of his car. Vivien stood near him, arms crossed. "You don't have to do this, Tyler. We can fight this." He laughed bitterly. "Fight what, Mom? The guy owns the house. He won. You lost. I'm done playing this game. She looked at him like she couldn't believe he was actually giving up. You're just going to leave? He turned to me, eyes full of resentment. Screw you, John. I smiled. Take care, Tyler. He got into his car and drove off. Sophia lasted 2 more months. She struggled, barely scraping by, trying to juggle school and work, but eventually, she caved. One morning, I found her at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard me walk in. I can't do this, she admitted, her voice small. I can't afford it. I leaned against the counter. Then leave. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. Just like that. Just like that. She exhaled, shaking her head. You know, I used to think you were pathetic. Just the weird, quiet kid who never stood up for himself. But you're not that kid anymore, are you? I shrugged. Guess not. A week later, she packed her bags too. That left only Vivien. She had lost everything. Tyler was gone. Sophia was gone. Arthur, despite everything, still lived in the house rent-free, but he had completely withdrawn from her. He barely spoke to her anymore. It was just her, me, and the silence. One evening, she stood in the kitchen, staring out the window as the sun set. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. You could leave, you know, I said. Find somewhere else. Start over. She didn't turn around. And go where? Not my problem. She let out a bitter laugh. You really do hate me, don't you? I thought about it. No, I said finally. I don't think about you enough to hate you. For once, she had no comeback. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Vivien was a shell of the woman she once was. The smug confidence, the condescending smirks, the manipulative charm, gone. She moved through the house like a ghost, silent and mechanical, doing the chores she once forced on me. Every morning, she was up before sunrise, scrubbing floors, cooking meals, folding laundry. At first, she thought she could do the bare minimum and I wouldn't notice. She was wrong. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found her setting the table. I picked up a plate, rubbing my thumb across the surface. A thin layer of grease. I held it up. Do it again. She clenched her jaw, nostrils flaring, but she took the plate back to the sink and scrubbed harder. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching. When she placed the plate back, I inspected it again, then nodded. Better. She muttered something under her breath. What was that? I asked, tilting my head. She swallowed hard, her lips pressing into a thin line. Nothing. Good, I said, sitting down. Because I'd hate to think you weren't grateful for having a place to live. She placed the last plate down with more force than necessary and left the room. I smirked, enjoying the shift in power. Days passed, and the house was spotless. She never dared to speak back, never defied an order, but I knew she hated every second of it. I saw it in the way her hands shook when she scrubbed the counters, the way she bit her lip until it nearly bled whenever I corrected her work. But she had no choice. This was her life now. One afternoon, I heard Arthur and Vivien arguing in the living room. I had been expecting this conversation. I can't do this anymore, she hissed. He's treating me like a servant in my own home. Arthur sighed heavily. It's his home, Vivien. We both know that now. You're really just going to let him do this, she snapped. Let him humiliate me? What do you want me to do? Arthur's voice was tired. You backed him into a corner for years. Now he's just giving you a taste of your own medicine. Vivien let out a bitter laugh. You're useless. I stepped into the room, making my presence known. She tensed but quickly masked it, straightening her posture. Enjoying your conversation? I asked casually. Arthur looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. Vivien folded her arms. I want out of this arrangement. I pretended to consider. Sure, pay your rent, and you can stop cleaning. She let out a sharp breath. You know I can't afford it. Then I guess you'd better get back to work. Her hands balled into fists. You think this is funny? I leaned against the wall. I think it's fair. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples. John, don't you think this has gone on long enough? I looked at him, my expression blank. Did she think kicking me out of my own house was too much? Did she think demanding I pay rent while her kids lived here for free was too much? Arthur had no response. Vivien's voice softened, turning into that sickly sweet tone she always used when she wanted something. John, I know I wasn't always kind to you, but this This is cruel. I raised you. I scoffed. You tolerated me. You never saw me as family. You made that clear when you chose your kids over me every single time. You only care now because you lost." Her face turned red. "You're not the same boy I used to control," she admitted, her voice tight. I smirked. "No, I'm not." She stormed off, slamming the door to her room. Arthur stood there awkwardly before sighing and walking away too. Over the next few weeks, the tension only grew. Vivien didn't speak to me unless necessary, but she never stopped following the rules. Every day, she cooked, cleaned, and did laundry. At dinner, she served me first. It wasn't about needing her to do these things. It was about balance. She had spent years controlling everything. Now, it was my turn. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the dining table, staring at an eviction notice. The deadline was approaching. She had no way out. No job, no money, no power. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "Are you really going to throw me out?" I crossed my arms. "You thought nothing of trying to throw me out. Why should I feel guilty?" Her voice cracked. "Because I have nowhere to go." I studied her, letting the silence stretch. "That's not my problem." A tear slipped down her cheek, but I felt nothing. For the first time, she understood. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. Vivien had finally broken. The woman who once ruled this house with sharp words and fake smiles now sat at the dining table in silence, her fingers trembling over the eviction notice. It was poetic in a way. She had spent years making sure I felt like an outsider in my own home, pushing me aside, controlling every part of my life she could. Now, she was the one waiting for a decision that wasn't hers to make. She wiped at her face quickly, as if embarrassed that I had seen her cry. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "John, please." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Please what?" She swallowed hard. "Please, don't throw me out." I studied her, unblinking. "You had no problem throwing me out." Her lips pressed together. "I was wrong." I leaned back, tilting my head. "You don't regret what you did. You just regret that it didn't work." Her eyes darted away. She knew I was right. I let the silence stretch between us. The truth was, I didn't need to kick her out. I had already won. She wasn't the same person who had looked down on me for years. She had lost her power. She had lost her children, who had abandoned her once they realized she couldn't protect them from the consequences of their actions. She had lost Arthur, who barely spoke to her now, too exhausted to keep defending her. But part of me didn't want to let her off that easily. I let out a slow breath. "You want to stay?" She nodded quickly. "Then you're going to earn it." Her shoulders tensed. "I've already been working." "No," I cut her off. "I mean earn it. If you stay, you'll do whatever I say. No complaints. No excuses. No attitude. You'll live here, but it will never be your home again. Do you understand?" Her breath hitched, but she nodded. I stood up. "Fine. You can stay. But if you ever try to cross me again, I won't hesitate to throw you out." She didn't argue. She didn't push back. She just nodded, defeated. Arthur walked in a few minutes later, eyeing the two of us cautiously. "Everything okay?" Vivien didn't answer. I met his gaze. "She's staying. On my terms." Arthur exhaled in relief. "Good." He hesitated. "You know, John, you didn't have to do all of this." I gave him a cold smile. "Yes, I did." The next few months passed, and things in the house settled into a strange new routine. Vivien continued to do the chores without question, but there was no fight left in her. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't argue. She didn't try to manipulate Arthur anymore. It was like she had finally realized that the battle was over, and she had lost. Tyler and Sophia never came back. Tyler moved in with a friend across the city, barely keeping his head above water. Sophia ended up dropping out of school and moving in with a distant relative. Neither of them called, not even to check on their mother. Arthur, for the first time in his life, seemed at peace. Without Vivien constantly whispering in his ear, he started acting like a real father again. We had dinner together sometimes, just the two of us. He apologized, not all at once, but in small ways. He never outright said he regretted letting Vivien walk all over me, but I knew he felt it. I could see it in the way he treated me now. One evening, I came home from work and found Vivien sitting on the back porch, staring out at the yard. She didn't look up when I stepped outside. "I used to love this house," she murmured. Back when I thought it was mine, I crossed my arms. It was never yours. She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. I know. She looked down at her hands. Do you ever think I'll be able to fix things? I raised an eyebrow. Fix what? She hesitated. With you. With Arthur. I leaned against the railing, staring at her. I don't think about you enough to care. She nodded slowly, like she had already expected that answer. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I had everything I wanted: control, peace, justice. And yet, there was a strange emptiness in the victory. Not regret, not guilt, just a quiet understanding that things could never go back to the way they were. And I was fine with that, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one suffering. They were, and that was enough.